The man never expected that after he finally defeated the final boss, all the players would get a button to exit the game, except for Shin, who couldn't leave. Even more outrageous, he was transported to the game's world 500 years in the future. In this place, his former NPC servants had all become living, breathing people, and each one was now a renowned figure. Upon arriving in this world, Shin realized something was off, as the game had never felt this realistic before. However, he could still access the game system's interface. After defeating the boss, he had leveled up to 255, with his attributes reaching absurdly high values. As expected, even though he could summon the system interface, there was no exit button. Resigned to his fate, Shin accepted the reality of his transmigration. He took an item from his inventory that could guide him back to his former in-game base. Although the familiar home remained unchanged, the elven girl before him was a stranger. At that moment, she was being forcefully taken away by some human thugs. A purple light enveloped her, and a giant boar monster appeared in front of the thugs. Terrified, they fled, leaving the elven girl behind. In the nick of time, Shin stepped in and killed the monster. Unlike in the game, he felt the recoil of his sword, a realistic sensation that he found unsettling. 2.5 minutes later, the elven girl, Tiara, brought her savior into the shop. She turned out to be an apprentice of the shop owner of the Moon's Altar. She was there to help her master look after the shop. When Tiara mentioned her master's name, Shin finally realized that Shni Razar was his former NPC servant in the game. Shin immediately claimed to be an old acquaintance of Razar and asked Tiara about her master's whereabouts. However, Tiara remained cautious and refused to divulge any information about her master. She did offer to pass on a message for a fee of 1,000 silver coins. Shin, however, only had holy gold coins. Just taking out the gold coins startled the elven girl, as only a select few kings of different races had the ability to retrieve items from a different dimension. Moreover, holy gold coins were items that could amplify magic, each worth at least hundreds of billions of silver coins. Yet, to Shin, they were merely the smallest unit of currency in the game. Tiara, realizing that Shin was an unfathomable person, directly asked who he really was. Shin's answer shocked her even more. He claimed to be just an ordinary adventurer of the high human race. In Tiara's understanding, high humans had long been extinct. After the event 500 years ago, a large number of humans disappeared simultaneously, and the 6 high humans were nowhere to be found. Shin connected the dots upon hearing this. Back then, tens of thousands of players were trapped in the game, and after he defeated the final boss, all those players got a logout button except for him, who was transported to another world. This might be the event the elven girl mentioned. To gather more information, Shin decided to give the holy gold coin to the elven girl, suggesting that as an elf, she should be able to utilize it. Tiara was surprised that Shin could see through her disguise. Her master had cast a disguise spell on her, making it difficult for ordinary people to discern her race. The reason for this was that Tiara had a cursed body. The boar monster that attacked her earlier was drawn to her because she had stepped outside the barrier. Whenever she left a certain range of the shop, monsters would attack. After hearing the whole story, Shin decided to help the poor elven girl. Using his skills, he discovered that the cause of her curse was the cursed body title that Tiara possessed. Shin then attempted to use a purification skill, and sure enough, it successfully lifted the curse. Tiara's hair, which had been cursed since childhood, returned to its natural silver color. Seeing her original silver hair for the first time in 100 years brought tears to her eyes. To test it, the two stepped outside the barrier, and nothing happened, confirming that Tiara's curse was indeed lifted. In gratitude, Tiara gave Shin a letter of introduction from her master, which would save him a lot of trouble. However, he would have to wait for Razar to return to contact him. When Shin arrived in the human kingdom with the letter of introduction, he realized it was no ordinary letter. Skipping the queue to enter the city was a minor perk. With this letter, even meeting the king wouldn't be a problem. Shortly after, Shin arrived at the Adventurers Guild in the town. He planned to register as an adventurer, allowing him to explore this new world while waiting for Razar's message. He then went to the town tavern, where he noticed that the adventurers were equipped with copper or iron weapons, and their armor was mostly leather or iron. The quality of equipment was much lower than what he had seen in the game. When his adventurer's ID was issued, it caught the attention of the guildmaster, who wanted to verify the authenticity of the letter of introduction. He explained that if two such letters were brought close together, they would glow, and he also informed Shin of the letter's various uses. Listening to all this, Shin realized how powerful his former NPC servant had become in this world 500 years later. After bidding farewell to the guildmaster, Shin took on his first mission the next day, gathering herbs in the monster forest outside town. This was the only task available for a G-rank adventurer. Surprisingly, it took him 3 hours to complete this low-level mission. As he was about to return to the Adventurers Guild to submit his task, he encountered a high-level monster, the Skeleton Knight, which was level 359. This was the perfect opportunity for Shin to test his strength in this world 500 years later. After a few simple exchanges, Shin did not gain any advantage. Even more absurd was that the opponent, a monster of the undead race, wielded a sword imbued with light attributes. Shin launched a few more attacks, but they did not inflict any damage on the monster. Moreover, his weapon's durability was almost depleted, with only one more strike left in it. So, Shin decided to show his true power. Limit release. Suddenly, light filled the area around him. With just one strike, Shin defeated the skeleton monster. Unfortunately, the opponent's light attribute sword was knocked far away. Shin had wanted that sword, but after the battle, he roughly understood his level of strength in this world. He found the transformation of this game into a reality-based otherworld increasingly interesting. Meanwhile, the Kingdom Princess's room was destroyed, and the flying object was none other than the light attribute sword. After defeating the opponent, Shin took the gemstone from the enemy and reported it to the Adventurers Guild. Unexpectedly, his action stunned all the guild staff. To them, a level 359 undead knight was a kingdom-level monster. This meant that Shin alone had at least the combat power equivalent to an S-class adventurer team. Afterward, Shin went to the town's library to learn about the history of this world. The kingdom had been established for 511 years, but unfortunately, he did not find any records of the event where players logged out of the game. However, Shin did not come away empty-handed. He discovered that the races in this world were exactly the same as those in the game settings he knew. 2.5 hours later, Shin arrived at the Adventurers Tavern. It was here that he first met one of the world's strong individuals, Wilhelm, known as the Vampire. Wilhelm's weapon was the magic spear, Venom, which was once considered a legendary weapon in the game, with performance rivaling that of mythic-grade items. Wilhelm himself was not simple either, being level 188. He also saw through Shin's armor. Although it appeared to be casual clothing, Wilhelm knew that this set of clothes was actually stronger than the heavy armor worn by other adventurers in the tavern. Wilhelm was called the Vampire because his weapon absorbed his opponent's life force. Over time, rumors spread in the town that Wilhelm was a terrifying vampire. At this point, the food arrived, and the two of them had a harmonious meal together. Meanwhile, all the guild's higher-ups gathered. After they identified the gemstone, they confirmed that Shin was not lying. He had indeed defeated the level 359 undead knight. Besides this, they discussed another matter. The Kingdom Princess's room had been pierced by a large sword. They connected the timing of the two events and realized that this sword was the weapon of the undead knight. Scholars' research revealed that this light attribute weapon was a top-tier artifact, with quality even surpassing the kingdom's national treasure, the Holy Sword. However, Shin was unaware of these developments. He was in town enjoying otherworldly snacks while planning his future actions. At that moment, a cat-eared lowly stared intently at the snack in Shin's hand. Seeing that she was practically drooling, Shin shared his snack with the girl. The girl mentioned that she was waiting for someone there. Coincidentally, the person she was waiting for was Wilhelm, whom Shin had met at noon. It turned out that the little girl was from an orphanage. Although Wilhelm appeared unapproachable, he often supported the orphanage. He was surprised that the girl was so close to Shin, as he knew she was usually very shy. As they were about to leave, the girl ran up to Shin and whispered in his ear, "Please go to the northern forest and save the fox." Back at the inn, Shin was puzzled by the girl's words. However, since he was already waiting for Rizar's reply, he figured he might as well visit the northern forest the next day. The next day, Shin arrived at the Moon Shrine. He left a weapon for Tira as a token. This way, her master would recognize Shin's identity upon seeing the weapon. Tira was initially startled by the weapon's aura, but after Shin's explanation, she realized that it was her master's exclusive weapon, usable only by Shin and Rizar. Tira was even more shocked to learn that the weapon was made from cores of legendary creatures such as the Black Death Dragon, the Sea Chaos Beast, and the Spirit Fox. Unintentionally, Shin had shown off again. Shin then handed Tira 2 envelopes, explaining that he could use them to contact him once Rizar returned. All she needed to do was write the recipient's name and message content, then say, "Send." Tira was amazed by the convenience of this tool and wondered why Shin didn't just use the letter to contact Rizar directly. Shin had tried that method the previous night, but it didn't work. Through experiments, they concluded that Shin had never met Rizar in this world, which was why the method failed. Tira asked for a few more envelopes, intending to study how the tool worked. It wasn't until Shin left that Tira realized she could just send the letter to her master herself. Shin then ventured deep into the northern forest. As soon as he stepped in, he was affected by a psychological suggestion barrier. Fortunately, he had enhanced resistance to mental interference, which might have otherwise caused others to turn back immediately. After advancing a bit further, Shin arrived at a small shrine. Upon opening the shrine's door, he found a small white fox lying inside. This must be the fox the cat-eared loli had mentioned. When Shin reached out to check, he discovered that the fox was both poisoned and cursed, and was in a critical condition. Shin immediately used a healing spell to remove the negative statuses. As the white fox awakened, the barrier outside the shrine shattered, revealing a horde of undead surrounding them. However, Shin remained unfazed. He drew his weapon and, with a single slash, defeated the monsters. He thought he had eliminated all the enemies, but the system prompt reappeared, indicating 2 more hostile entities. In the next second, the white fox statue in front of Shin shattered, revealing 2 large white foxes wrapped in miasma. Worse still, the 2 giant white foxes were of level 674, the highest level monsters Shin had encountered in this world. After dodging their attacks, Shin immediately used shadow magic to bind their movements. However, the enemies completely unleashed their miasma, instantly blocking all of Shin's senses. In this environment, he couldn't locate the enemies, and to avoid harming the small white fox in his hands, Shin couldn't exert his full strength. Fortunately, the small white fox gave him a hint, the magic circle that had previously sealed it. Upon reaching the center of the magic circle, Shin found that he could see through the fog. The next second, the 2 white foxes charged at him. With one move, Shin bound them, and with a burst of intense light, the 2 monsters were slain. Afterward, Shin checked the small white fox's attributes and discovered it was a level 211 Spirit Fox. Shin was utterly stunned. Spirit Foxes were among the rarest boss monsters in the game, usually appearing in humanoid or giant fox forms. He never expected to see a cub in this world, which was essentially a divine-level pet. Moreover, the small white fox was willing to follow its savior. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Rizar received a letter. Since saving the white fox at the shrine, Shin had formed a master-servant contract with it and named the small white fox Yuzuha. This way, no one weaker than Shin could discern that Yuzuha was a divine pet spirit fox. After returning to town, Shin immediately went to the guild to report, as the appearance of numerous undead in the northern forest was highly unusual. Shin was quite popular, and the twin sisters at the reception almost argued over who would assist him. After completing his report, Shin prepared to take on the next quest. It was then that he noticed a peculiar task on the mission board: to find someone with the purification skill. The requester was the orphanage run by the church. Remembering that the small white fox's information had come from the cat-eared loli, who was an orphan from the church orphanage, he accepted the mission without hesitation. Upon arriving at the church orphanage, the nun seemed wary of him. It wasn't until Shin met Millie again that the nun finally relaxed. She explained the details of the request. They hoped to find someone with the purification skill. In this world, not everyone possessed skills, so posting a request was a long shot. The nun didn't hold much hope for actually finding someone with the skill. To her surprise, Shin, sitting right in front of her, not only had the skill, but also knew the conditions to acquire it. Shin did not ask for monetary compensation. Instead, he wanted to know Millie's abilities and the reason they needed purification. It turned out that Millie held the title of astrologer, which meant she could foresee the future. The earlier situation with the small white fox was a sudden premonition. Such an ability, if it fell into the wrong hands, could undoubtedly lead to catastrophic events. Fortunately, adventurers who grew up in the orphanage would help protect it. The reason for requesting to learn the purification skill was because the orphanage was about to close. The church lacked a talented priest, so another priest had to take over. Unfortunately, the new male priest was extremely money-minded and immediately expressed his intention to abolish the unprofitable orphanage. As a result, the children at the orphanage despised him. The nun then brought a young girl to meet Shin. She was the one tasked with learning the skill. At that moment, Wilhelm, whom Shin had previously met in the restaurant, appeared. Wilhelm had grown up in the orphanage and was the person the old nun mentioned would protect it. Knowing that Millie trusted Shin, Wilhelm offered his assistance as well. Shin then explained the conditions for learning purification. The girl had to personally defeat 200 undead monsters of level 150 or higher while holding an item called the Holy Prayer Gem. This revelation stunned everyone present, as Shin had nonchalantly spoken about something quite incredible. That night, Wilhelm found Shin and directly asked if he was a chosen one. Shin had no idea what that meant, prompting Wilhelm to explain. Chosen ones are individuals born with extensive knowledge. Given Shin's vast knowledge, Wilhelm had assumed Shin was one of them. The next day, the three of them headed to the undead plains, filled with high-level undead. Shin gave the Holy Prayer Gem to the girl and began power leveling her. He first weakened the monsters with his skills, then let the girl deliver the final blow. Wilhelm, as a member of the orphanage, accompanied them to help. After clearing the outskirts of the plains, they ventured into the deeper forest, home to even higher-level undead. As expected, several monsters immediately targeted them upon entering the barrier. Shin proposed that he and Wilhelm each handle one side of the monsters while Yuzuha stayed behind to protect the girl. Thus, they began continuously defeating monsters, with the girl's level rising at an astonishing rate. Meanwhile, on the other side of the undead plains, the kingdom's princess was battling a skeleton knight, wielding the great sword Shin had knocked away. The scene shifted to the raid team facing a dire situation against the skeleton knight. At this critical moment, Rizar appeared. With a swift and deadly display of swordsmanship, he instantly killed the skeleton knight. Rizar then noticed something peculiar. A mass of pitch-black magic gathered into a sphere, which then began to flow out like ink. To everyone's shock, the liquid formed into an enormous skeleton, a nation-destroying skeleton lord of level 804. Even Shin would feel immense pressure facing such a powerful foe. Worse still, the skeleton lord could summon endless undead. Even with Shin releasing his full power, it was extremely challenging to eliminate such a vast number of minions in a short time. At this critical moment, one of Shin's former NPC retainers appeared. This marked the first time in 500 years that master and servant fought together again. Before the skeleton lord appeared, Shin's group had successfully helped the nun change her class, achieving their goal. They were about to return to town when the scene of the magic converging occurred. The skeleton lord emerged and with a single punch shattered the barrier over the entire undead plains. Witnessing such a powerful blow, Wilhelm immediately understood that this was a nation-destroying monster. Before they could escape, the skeleton lord summoned undead from all around, surrounding the three of them. Seeing this, Wilhelm suggested that he and Shin break through the encirclement together. Unexpectedly, Shin lifted his restrictions, and the overpowering aura he emitted left Wilhelm in shock. Shin declared that they couldn't just let this creature be. He would find a way to deal with the skeleton lord. He then cast a speed-boosting buff on Wilhelm to help him escape and began his battle. The small white fox on Shin's head started by spewing blue foxfire, which turned any undead it touched to ash. Shin followed suit, his katana crackling with red lightning. He simply plunged it into the ground, instantly destroying countless skeletons and creating a massive crater. The blinding light from his attack alerted Rizar, who was also on the undead plains. Sensing the familiar aura, she immediately headed toward Shin. On the other side, Shin initially believed his attack had wiped out half the enemies, but upon checking the map, he realized he had vastly underestimated their number. Just then, a friendly blip rapidly approached on the map, and monsters disappeared in that direction. Shin sprinted towards it, and his suspicion was confirmed. It was his former NPC retainer, Rizar. Before Shin could say anything, the undead pursued from behind. The small white fox, understanding the situation, jumped down and erected a barrier to temporarily block the monsters. In the next moment, Rizar leapt into Shin's arms. For her, this was the first time in 500 years of lonely existence that she saw her master again. Though she had countless things to say and ask, hearing Shin say, "I'm back," was enough to put her at ease. Despite having much to discuss, their immediate priority was to deal with the towering skeleton lord in front of them. The master and servant duo combined their powers, casting a spell that completely countered the undead. Raising their arms, they activated a formation, and under the holy light, the undead were annihilated one after another, even affecting the skeleton lord. Shin then leapt into the air and, with one slash, ended the battle. As the skeleton lord lay on the ground, it astonishingly began to speak. "Give me that power." With those words, it perished. Shin then picked up its gem. Afterward, the two found a place to sit, and Shin recounted his experiences from the game. He explained that after defeating the boss, he approached a light gate and lost consciousness. When he came to, he found himself in a world 500 years in the future. Therefore, he hadn't been idling away for 500 years. Upon hearing everything, Rizar shared information about their current world. At that time, all NPCs suddenly gained the ability to act autonomously, and the retainers of other players were frantically discussing that their masters had disappeared. Rizar and her group knew then that their master had successfully completed the game. Shin was a bit surprised by what Rizar said. Not that the NPCs had gained awareness, but that they could suddenly act on their own. After some questioning, he discovered that they had actually had self-awareness since the game days, but couldn't act entirely independently. So they were aware of the game's events. Rizar also knew that after Shin defeated the boss, the NPCs were supposed to disappear. However, strangely, that didn't happen, and everyone was still alive and well. To find Shin, his retainers had dispersed across the world for 500 years. Little did they expect to reunite with Shin under such circumstances. As they prepared to return to town, Shin noticed that Yuzua's tail had split into 3. Just then, Yuzua woke up and unexpectedly greeted Shin with a "good morning," which shocked him. It turned out that the moment the skeleton lord vanished, Yuzua began to evolve. Shin didn't fully understand the reason but decided to have Yuzua communicate telepathically and disguise her tails as one to avoid revealing her spirit fox heritage. Yuzua was truly adorable. Meanwhile, the kingdom's princess and her group arrived at the site where the skeleton lord had died. They had also been dealing with a large number of undead when a distant light that enveloped the sky wiped out all enemies. Upon arriving at the scene, they found only the massive crater and the red katana Shin had left behind. Such a finely crafted blade could only be made by a high-level human known as the blacksmith of black iron. The man couldn't believe it. The legends passed down over 500 years spoke of high-level humans who were not only incredibly powerful, but also excelled in at least one supreme skill. Even now, some ordinary people still worshipped high-level humans as deities. Shin's specialty was forging, known to the world as the blacksmith of black iron. What Shin didn't expect was that the kingdom's princess had already surmised his identity as a high-level human. She planned to visit the moon shrine immediately upon returning to the kingdom and challenge him. On the other side, Shin revealed his identity to Wilhelm, considering Wilhelm had witnessed him lifting the seal. Shin explained that the power he had released earlier was just a fraction of his true strength. Wilhelm, upon hearing this, didn't even want to comment. Before leaving, Shin gave Wilhelm an enchanted envelope and said that he could contact him through it if needed. However, Wilhelm did not immediately accept it. Shin could tell that Wilhelm was being stubborn, so he directly handed the envelope to him. Saying that Wilhelm was the first friend he had made since arriving, he added that even for the sake of protecting the kids at the orphanage, he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. In the end, Wilhelm accepted the envelope, acknowledging Shin as a friend. Rizar couldn't help but sigh, noting that Shin hadn't changed a bit. His master never let his strength make him arrogant, always protecting the weak and his friends equally. Afterward, they returned to the moon shrine. When Tira saw her master return, she immediately ran to her. Only then did she notice Shin behind Razor and wondered why he was with her. Razor explained that Shin was the manager of the Moon Shrine. Hearing this, Tiara was so shocked she stepped back. In her mind, the owner of the Moon Shrine was a legendary high-level human. Although Shin had mentioned it before, she thought he was boasting and didn't take it seriously. She immediately began apologizing to Shin, especially since she had previously asked her boss for money. Later, they started dinner, with Razor personally preparing the dishes. Each one was a new experience for Tiara. Moreover, she noticed something odd. While the food looked normal, each dish emitted an intimidating aura. She was very curious about the ingredients. Shin and Razor calmly discussed the various materials, whether meat or vegetables, all of which were extremely rare. Even Tiara, who had lived for hundreds of years, had only heard of them. But to Shin and Razor, these ingredients seemed as common as market produce. Perhaps this was how conversations among masters went. After the meal, Shin returned to his most familiar room. Despite the 500 years that had passed, it was spotless. He changed clothes and went straight to sleep. In the middle of the night, Shin groggily woke up, feeling something soft beside him. Upon closer inspection, he found Razor sleeping next to him. Initially, he intended to wake her, but then he saw tears slowly rolling down her face. He gently wiped them away. The next morning, Shin found Razor no longer beside him, though a tuft of silver hair remained in the bedding. Lifting the covers, he discovered that it was the humanoid form of the little white fox. Seeing this, he prepared clothes for Yuzuha and informed Razor and the others about it. Shin was curious about one thing: why Yuzuha had been at the shrine in the first place. Even though Yuzuha had been a little white fox, given her spirit fox lineage, she would still be several hundred years old. Yuzuha didn't quite remember why she was there either. She only recalled sunbathing when suddenly everything started collapsing. Instinctively, she suppressed the area to prevent further chaos. When Yuzuha woke up again, she encountered Shin. Shin mentioned that at that time, Yuzuha was already at the brink of death. If he had been even half a day later, she might have died from exhaustion. The credit for saving Yuzuha goes to Millie from the orphanage. Therefore, Shin asked Tsuyoha to visit and thank Millie when she had the chance. Razor then brought up another matter. She wanted Shin to quickly go see someone, Jirato, his former NPC retainer. Shin was shocked to hear this. As a beastman, Jirato was still alive, even though high-level beastmen only live up to 150 years. Razor explained that Jirato's end was near, which is why she suggested Shin should see him immediately. Jirato was currently with the Beastmen tribe and was also the founding Beast King who united the Beastmen race. Understanding everything, Shin decided to set off the next morning, accompanied by Tiara and Yuzuha. With Tiara's curse now lifted, it was a good opportunity for her to go out and explore. As for the Moon Shrine store, Shin could store it away. Razor, on the other hand, would head to the kingdom first to report the events concerning the Skeleton Lord. Afterward, she would meet up with Shin. She also suggested forming a party with Shin, allowing them to communicate anytime via party chat. It turned out that some of the game systems still functioned in this world, although only Shin could see the system interface. Tiara followed Shin to the Adventurers Guild to register as an adventurer. As a shut-in who hadn't left home for 100 years, everything in town seemed incredibly fresh to her. She instinctively held Shin's hand as they wandered around, only realizing she didn't know the way when Shin reminded her. Blushing, she let go of his hand. At the Adventurers Guild, the receptionist first upgraded Shin's rank to E-level adventurer. The guild had verified Shin's previous reports. Not only had he defeated a high-level skeleton knight, but he had also eradicated a large number of undead. Any one of these feats would have been enough to make Shin an S-level adventurer. However, to consider the feelings of other adventurers, the guild decided to gradually raise his rank. Noticing Tiara, the receptionist's expression changed and started questioning her identity with a sharp tone. Seeing the receptionist muttering like a little grudge holder, Shin quickly changed the subject to avoid further tension. He mentioned their travel destination and asked if there were any suitable quests. The receptionist found a fitting task: escorting a merchant to Fanid, which coincidentally was also Shin's destination. After registering Tiara as a G-level adventurer, they both accepted the escort quest. Before departing, they visited the orphanage to say goodbye and to leave behind protective items. Shin had enchanted these items with numerous spells, ensuring they would protect the children from all but the strongest enemies. since Wilhelm was away investigating the priest, and Shin had to travel far to find his former NPC retainer. Leaving these protective charms gave him peace of mind. Then they arrived at a secluded alley. There was one last thing to do before setting off: return to the Moon Shrine and store the entire building away. However, what caught Tira's attention the most was the teleportation gem in Shin's hand. The teleportation magic had long been lost, let alone teleportation gems made through magic. What surprised Tira even more was Shin's casual remark that he could easily make a bunch of such gems as long as he had the materials. Tira decided not to comment. After all, he was a legendary high-level human. Shin then used the teleportation gem. When Tira regained her senses, they were already standing in front of the Moon Shrine. Shin then used storage magic. As the master of the Moon Shrine, he could carry it with him at will. The moon-shaped necklace was the portable form of the Moon Shrine. Little did Shin expect that his simple act of taking the house with him would shock the entire kingdom's upper echelon. The moment the Moon Shrine disappeared, the king was immediately informed. Since the major event 500 years ago, the Moon Shrine had stood in that place, unassailable by any powerful figures, let alone the monsters around the forest. Now, the sudden disappearance of this mysterious building threw the kingdom's leaders into a panic, fearing some dreadful event might occur. Fortunately, the second princess remained calm. She inquired about Rizar's intelligence and learned that Rizar was on her way here. This information somewhat reassured the meeting attendees. By the afternoon, Shin had found the carriage for their quest. The Draconian and the red-haired lowly before him were also adventurers who had accepted the same escort quest. Once all the adventurers had gathered, the elderly man who was the client appeared, and they officially set off for Fanid. During the journey, they began to introduce themselves. The Draconian was an A-level adventurer and a warrior. The redhead was an E-level adventurer and a pugilist. Shin himself was also a warrior, a very rare profession. Shin and the Draconian exchanged information about the warrior's birthplace, a small island. From the Draconian, Shin learned an interesting fact. The adventurer guilds there were large guilds established by players during the game era. Before long, the carriage suddenly stopped. It turned out that bandits had appeared, demanding the merchant hand over his money and goods. Their words implied they had no intention of sparing anyone's life and included vile remarks directed at the red-haired lolly in the group, suggesting they would take good care of her. This immediately angered Shin. However, the bandits seemed unfazed, even making more outrageous comments. Only Tira, hidden behind the carriage, noticed that Shin's aura of killing intent was completely different from usual. She didn't want Shin to become so murderous. Meanwhile, the Draconian brother drew his long sword, threatening the bandits to leave. Unexpectedly, the bandits showed no fear. On the contrary, they even knew the Draconian was an A-level adventurer and that the others were merely E-level. This information gave them the confidence to believe they could win. Shin realized that since the enemy knew their information, this ambush must have been premeditated. The white-haired bandit was about to mock them further when an arrow whizzed past his face, striking one of the ambushers they had hidden in the woods. The battle was imminent. First, the red-haired lowly defeated one enemy with a single punch, using a skill far beyond what an E-level adventurer could master. Next, the Draconian warrior effortlessly sliced an opponent in half with one stroke. Finally, Shin dispatched the remaining bandits in mere moments, with none of them surviving a single round against him. Seeing this, the bandit leader panicked. Despite wielding magic swords and having supposedly higher levels according to their intelligence, they were utterly defeated. His magic sword was also shattered by a single strike from Shin. Shin then successfully completed the guild quest and decided to wait for Rizar in the town of Belen. The Draconian and the lowly, who had also accepted the quest, continued to their next destination. Considering the distance to Fanid, they decided to buy a carriage, which would not only hasten their journey to find the second NPC retainer, but also provide a more comfortable ride. However, after inspecting many carriages, they found that the quality was generally poor. Neither wanted to spend money on something uncomfortable, especially since the previous carriage ride had left Tira's butt numb from the bumps. Shin had a solution for this, given his true identity as the Blacksmith of Darkness, a high-level human. Modifying a carriage would be a breeze for him. To stay low-key, They chose an ordinary-looking carriage, but the owner advised them that they would need strong horses to pull it. Alternatively, they could use monsters, provided they could tame loyal ones. After leaving the shop, Shin used his telepathic skill to learn that Rysar had finished handling the kingdom's matters and intended to meet up with him immediately. Upon knowing Shin's location and that he was about to buy a carriage, Rysar took on the task of finding suitable horses, assuring Shin she wouldn't disappoint him. She also reported on the moon shrine situation. The sudden disappearance of the moon shrine had greatly worried the kingdom's high officials, turning their faces pale with concern. However, Rysar thought it wasn't a bad thing to make them panic a bit. Due to Rysar's immense power, the kingdom publicly praised and flattered her while secretly sending people to monitor her movements. Rysar had long been annoyed by this behavior. Some nations had even unilaterally declared the moon shrine as their own, which made Rysar feel like destroying those countries. Their true aim was to control Rysar's unbeatable strength, believing that possessing the moon shrine equated to having control over Rysar. Some fools even tried to win her over through marriage proposals. After ending the party chat, Shin was about to find an inn. Seeing this, a stall owner recommended a place to them. When they found the inn, they realized it was the most luxurious establishment in town. Just staying one night used up half of their escort mission's reward. However, you get what you pay for, and the environment here was indeed quite nice for another world. Tira and Yuzuha's candid conversation in the bath made Shin blush furiously, forced him to walk to the bed and admire the beautiful moonlight. The next day, they returned to the carriage shop. In just 2.5 seconds, Shin had completed the carriage modifications, leaving Tiara stunned. Before Tiara could even finish her exclamation, Shin received news that Rysar had arrived. They headed outside the city gates, and upon seeing the horse pulling the carriage, they were both left speechless. Rysar had brought a divine beast, claiming that only a creature of such caliber could match Shin. This divine beast could also freely change its size, which would prevent any issues when staying at inns, and this was why Rysar chose this wolf. The group then set off for Faned. As expected, the divine beast's performance was extraordinary. Passers-by only felt a gust of wind, unable to see the group clearly when they looked back. Moreover, thanks to Shin's modifications, the passengers in the carriage felt no bumps at all. During the journey, Shin noticed that Yuzuha could communicate with the white wolf. Yuzuha explained the wolf's backstory, revealing that it had once lived on a sacred peak with its mother until adventurers killed her. The young wolf had barely escaped and was later rescued by an elf girl. After growing stronger, it returned to the sacred peak, only to discover that the elf girl was none other than Tira. Hearing this, Tira recalled saving an injured puppy in her childhood. She hadn't expected to reunite with it over 100 years later. Knowing this, Rysar decided to transfer the ownership of the White Wolf to Tira. They stopped the carriage, and Rysar first dissolved the master-servant contract. Then the White Wolf willingly accepted Tira as its new master. That evening, Shin revealed Rysar's reasoning. Making Tira the White Wolf's master was not just about their bond, but also to give Tira an additional means of self-defense in the future. 2 days later, they arrived in Fanid. The locals seemed to have anticipated their arrival, with a guide waiting for them. After storing the carriage and shrinking the White Wolf, they finally met Shin's second NPC retainer, Girato. To the inhabitants of this world, high-level humans were like deities. Even the current Beast King and his daughter could only sit respectfully when meeting Shin. The white-haired man sitting at the center was the first Beast King of the Beast Kingdom and was also Shin's NPC retainer from his gaming days. Beyond their master-servant relationship, they were close friends who could entrust their lives to each other, having once broken through a siege of thousands of monsters together. After 500 years, they met again, and their relationship remained unchanged. Shin explained to Girato the reason for his 500-year disappearance. They talked until evening, and it was then that Girato finally brought up the main issue. With a calm expression, he revealed that his end was near, and he might not last a month. He had realized this several weeks ago, coinciding with Shin's appearance. It felt as though the time that had stopped within him began to move again with Shin's arrival. Perhaps he had lived until now just to meet Shin once more and fulfill his long-held wish. Girato earnestly requested a duel with Shin. His wish was to fight Shin and end his life as a warrior. Seeing Girato's serious expression, Shin accepted the challenge. However, Shin's only concern was for the Beast Kingdom's descendants. Although Jirato's close aides might have sensed his intentions, the direct descendants, the Beast King and the Beast Princess, were still unaware of this matter. That evening, Jirato gathered the Beast King and Princess. With a relaxed demeanor, he announced that he had found his final resting place. The duel would take place in a week, in a nearby forest. Though the princess was reluctant, she decided to witness the duel personally after understanding her ancestors' wish. During the following week, Shin lived in the Beast Kingdom. He also brought out the Moon Shrine to help Jirato repair his damaged weapons. With a light tap from his small hammer, a burst of light restored the entire set of divine-level equipment to its original state, leaving the onlookers in awe. The day before the duel, Shin personally handed the weapons to Jirato. Under the moonlight, they talked about Rizar. Jirato asked Shin if he would leave Rizar behind if he found a way home. Shin didn't hide anything and straightforwardly said that leaving this world was his reason for striving so far, but he would try to find a solution that would benefit both. On the day of the duel, there was no sorrowful farewell between them. Instead, they eagerly anticipated the upcoming battle. Jirato bid a final farewell to his clanspeople, who would witness his departure from a cliff. To them, it had been a long time since they had seen the first Beast King so happy, and perhaps this was the best end for him. The duel began with an intense exchange of blows. After the initial frontal combat, they moved into a chase through the forest, causing great commotion throughout. Jirato's true strength, when serious, was astonishing. However, what surprised everyone more was that this was only their warm-up. Even Rizar would struggle against a fully powered Jirato. As expected, both fighters in the forest finally got serious. Jirato transformed completely into his beast form. He knew Shin could kill him in an instant, but after 500 years of relentless training, he wanted to use his fangs to bite Shin, even if only for a moment. Facing Shin's long-range lightning attack, Jirato flashed behind him. With a powerful punch, he momentarily overpowered Shin. Green energy surged from his hands, and while Shin struggled to fend off the attack, Jirato appeared behind him once again. What followed was a torrent of skill combos, as fluid as a flowing stream, results of Jirato's relentless training over the past 500 years, and Shin witnessed this firsthand. At the same time, he felt ashamed. Facing a comrade fighting with his life on the line, he had even thought of going easy on him. To honor Jirato's resolve, Shin unleashed his ultimate move. It was a clash of finishing moves, and the powerful light was about to determine the victor. In the next second, Jirato's sword shattered. He flashed behind Shin, and just as his fist connected, Jirato's body also gave out, collapsing and reverting to his human form. However, his years of training had indeed allowed his fangs to reach Shin, fulfilling his long-held wish. Yet, Jirato knew one thing clearly. Shin had still held back. In his final moments, Jirato requested that Shin use his full power to send him off. With mixed emotions, Shin unleashed a tremendous burst of energy, and Jirato departed with a smile. Afterwards, the Beast Kingdom held a funeral for Jirato. Following the ceremony, Shin sat alone at the spot where he and Jirato used to chat, staring blankly at the moon. Only Rizar understood Shin's grief. In Rizar's embrace, Shin finally let out his emotions. Sending off a comrade with your own hands is a painful experience for anyone. Shin's identity seemed to be exposed. To prevent him from being targeted by the royal family, Rizar came up with a good idea. Someone just needed to pretend to be his wife. Simply saying, "I am your fiancé," should suffice. Before this, due to the special status of the elves, Rizar and Tina had disguised themselves as members of the Beast tribe. Both felt the disguise suited them well. At the funeral, Shin encountered another NPC companion from his past, Shibaid, a high-ranking dragonkin from a neighboring country. During his free time, Shin visited him. Shibaid had once served as the first Dragon King of the Dragon Kingdom. Although he had severed ties with the royal family, he remained a significant figure in the nation. After 500 years, Shibaid was extremely excited to see Shin again, immediately kneeling before him, which left Shin at a loss. He quickly urged Shibaid not to be so formal. Shibaid then noticed Rizar's strange attire, which puzzled him. Rizar explained it was Shin's preference. Returning to the main topic, Shin planned to continue his investigation in the capital's sacred grounds. The Dragonkin stated he needed to return to his country first and would join them later. Before departing, Shin handed him his enhanced divine weapon, which was the Dragonkin's specialized weapon, now with its overall performance increased by 50%. After temporarily bidding farewell to the Dragonkin, Shin headed to the local adventurers guild to take on a mission. The goblin subjugation mission seemed quite suitable. The daughter of the current Beast King wanted to see the world and requested to join them. Under Shin's plan, the poor goblins were wiped out before they could even react. After completing the mission and reporting to the receptionist, Shin received a letter left by the previous guildmaster. The letter stated that an important figure in the kingdom wanted to meet him and hoped he would return quickly. Shin suddenly remembered his previous solo monster hunting incident. Perhaps he had accidentally sent a monster sword flying into the palace. It seemed he needed to return and handle this matter first. Before that, Shin met with the current Beast King and passed on Girato's weapons to him, fulfilling Girato's dying wish. After saying their goodbyes, to conserve energy, Shin used a crystal to teleport everyone to the Moon Shrine's previous location. The radar showed someone was watching them. Razar speculated that they were guarding the area, expecting the Moon Shrine to reappear. She suddenly became melancholic, talking about waiting for someone who suddenly disappeared, a feeling Shin could understand. However, he couldn't say for sure when he would leave this world. Later, they arrived at the Adventurers Guild in the capital and met familiar receptionists. The younger sister quickly went to report their arrival. The older sister teased Shin, noting that there seemed to be more beautiful girls around him. Shin retorted that he had also completed missions with Wilhelm. Hearing Wilhelm's name, the entire guild fell silent because Wilhelm was known for his cold demeanor and rarely teamed up with others. Shin's mysteriousness increased significantly within the guild. Back to the main topic. The people in the palace were ready, so they let Shin in. This was the kingdom's grand mage, and it turned out he was summoned because of the sword that was sent flying earlier. He explained that the large sword with the colored blade flew directly towards the royal city and pierced into the bedroom of the second princess of the palace, causing quite a commotion. Fortunately, no one was injured. The sword's material was extremely excellent, its quality surpassing all the treasured swords in the kingdom. The man asked if Shin knew the origin of the sword. Shin felt a bit guilty. He couldn't hide it anymore. Afterward, the kingdom's second princess summoned him. She had taken quite an interest in Shin. After returning to the Moon Shrine, Shin told Rizar and the others everything that had happened. The experienced Rizar immediately saw through the intentions. It seems that the people in the palace have taken a liking to your talents and want to recruit you into the capital, either to hold an official position or to marry you off to a noble of high status. Upon hearing this, Shin suddenly didn't want to go. Rizar came up with a good idea. She could pretend to be Shin's wife. If that wasn't enough, they could also have Tielna pretend. Upon hearing this, Yuzuha also volunteered, saying she could be Shin's wife too. But that was out of the question. Yuzuha was underage, which would be illegal. The next day, Shin went to the palace and met the kingdom's second princess, Rion. She inquired about the situation at that time. Shin truthfully said that the skeleton-faced knight was a formidable opponent, and his sword was shattered during the battle. The princess immediately ruled out Shin being the chosen one. She explained, "I possess an intuition skill. Since birth, my intuition has never been wrong. And you have a letter of introduction from Razar, so we have reason to trust you. The testing phase is over. Now on to the main topic. Shin, I want to challenge you to a duel." To prevent the princess from discovering he was a high-level human, Shin held back significantly during the duel. Despite the obvious flaws in his opponent's movements, he had to feign shock. But that wasn't enough. Given his level, a casual strike could seriously harm the princess. So Shin began his tricky maneuver. He further compressed his already greatly reduced abilities until he could match the princess's strength. However, the princess was not weak. Under the constraint of his suppressed abilities, she almost managed to injure Shin. In the end, the princess didn't discover Shin's true strength, thinking she had met a worthy opponent. Seeing that she was finally satisfied with the fight, both the guards and Shin breathed a sigh of relief. It turned out that Shin had previously sent the Holy Light Sword flying into the princess's room. The princess later investigated this and summoned Shin. In this country, when proposing, a man would give a woman a sword as a gift. If the man was unfaithful, the woman could cut him into 18 pieces with that sword. Fortunately, the princess knew it was just a misunderstanding. She summoned Shin to resolve the matter and wanted to keep the sword as a gift rather than a token of love. She also intended to give Shin a large sum of money. This way, Shin's trouble was resolved, and the princess could obtain a weapon surpassing the kingdom's treasures. But what the princess didn't expect was that Shin actually refused the money. This was an amount sufficient to live a life of leisure forever, yet he casually declined it, only asking for access to the National Magic Library. What the princess didn't know was that Shin could easily produce a coin from the game era, which would be worth billions in the kingdom's currency. To Shin, money was trivial. The information of this world was what he truly desired. Afterward, they left the arena, only to find the guards who had been standing outside the door all lying on the ground. Behind them stood a minister of the country. Shin immediately recognized that the minister was under the effects of charm and confusion spells. Before he could react, both he and the princess were teleported to another location. When Shin opened his eyes again, he found himself in a desolate ruin. Fortunately, the princess was safe beside him. Before he could make his next move, Riser's extremely anxious voice echoed in his mind. She had almost thought Shin was going to disappear suddenly again. After explaining the situation, Shin asked Riser to head to the royal city to capture the mastermind behind this, as both charm and confusion spells were forbidden skills, and their effective range wasn't large. This meant the caster was within the palace. More importantly, Shin sensed in that last moment before being teleported that the caster wasn't human, but a miasma demon, the nemesis of humans. The two foxes Shin had encountered earlier were creatures controlled by miasma demons. These demons are ranked in several levels. The closer to human form, the higher their combat power and intelligence. Judging by the complex plan of charming the minister and teleporting the princess, the miasma demon in the royal city was likely of the count rank, with levels between 300 and 400. Riser took Tira with her to show her how to deal with miasma demons. Before entering, they cast stealth magic and then walked openly within the palace. Their destination this time was the underground dungeon where the minister was held. Tira first hypnotized the guards, then took the keys from them to unlock the door. Inside was indeed the minister. She planned to first dispel the minister's abnormal state, but several tentacles suddenly attacked from behind. However, Riser had anticipated this and easily cut off the attack. At that moment, the real culprit appeared, a level 423 Hell Miasma Demon. The Miasma Demon launched attacks, but Riser easily deflected them. The foolish Miasma Demon, unable to win, didn't even try to escape, but instead taunted Riser as a spirit abandoned by its master. Hearing this, Riser silently put away her weapon, and then switched to the katana Aozuki, given by Shin. In the next second, she decapitated the Miasma Demon. Afterward, Riser explained the situation with the Miasma Demon to the king, which led to the minister's death sentence being lifted. Riser then prepared to search for Shin. It turned out that the place Shin had been teleported to was very far from the capital. They agreed through telepathy on a meeting place, the fortress city of Balmel. She couldn't wait to head there.